Snowbound. Starving. Desperate. The Donner Party's westward journey in 1846 began as a hopeful march toward California, but ended in one of the most harrowing survival stories in American history. Trapped in the Sierra Nevada by an unforgiving winter, families endured 5 months of hunger, despair, and a silence broken only by the unthinkable choice, cannibalism. In this episode of Family Macabre Tales, we descend into the frozen camps, the reckless decisions, and the haunted memories that turned ordinary pioneers into a legend of horror and endurance. If this story grips you, remember to like the video, subscribe, and ring the bell, because the frontier holds many more macabre family tales waiting to be told. Spring, 1846. The prairie is damp with thaw and ambition. Wagons creak out of Illinois yards and rattle toward the Missouri frontier, canvas tops billowing like small white clouds pushed by a steady western wind. Families sell what they can't carry and bind the rest to hickory bows and iron hoops, furniture cut down to fit a wagon bed, a cradle roped beside a feed barrel, a Bible tucked into a trunk between quilts. They are leaving the known warmth of hearth and parlor for the wide, speculative promise of California. At the heart of one such column is an unlikely tandem, the Donners and the Reeds. George Donner, gray at the temples, steady in his speech, travels with his brother Jacob and their combined families. Alongside them rolls the household of James Fraser Reed, an Irish-born entrepreneur whose means and confidence set him apart on the trail. Reed's wagon is a curiosity, custom-built, taller than most, with space enough to feel almost like a moving room. Children steal glances at it as it lurches along, calling it a palace car, as if luxury could be bolted to a chassis and hauled behind oxen. In that small marvel lies a kernel of the party's character, hopeful ingenuity, but also weight, drag, and the persistent illusion that comfort can be brought into a wilderness that does not care for it. They are not alone. Hundreds move west this season, an exodus with many destinations and one justification, manifest destiny, the conviction that the continent is a story meant to be read from right to left, Atlantic to Pacific, page after page of settlement. For some, the dream is acreage and orchards in a milder climate, for others, a new ledger with old debts erased. California, still Mexican territory, glimmers in the imagination as a place where orchards are heavy and winters gentle. No one speaks of gold, no one knows to, but the word opportunity is heavy in every mouth. They pass from the soft green of Illinois into a geography of thresholds. River crossings become rites of passage, ferries and fords that shuffle who is wet and who is dry, who loses an axle, who gains a scar. Children learn the new mathematics of the trail, how many miles make a good day, 15 is praised, 20 is a miracle, how many oxen are needed to pull a wagon from gumbo mud, how many minutes of dusk you have before the prairie disappears into the dark and coyotes begin to stitch their thin songs across the plain. Women in sunbonnets walk beside the wheels, keeping pace with the slow rhythm of hoof and boot. Men ride ahead to scout the best descent to a creek bank, or fall back to hammer a wheel rim back into place. Between the wagons, hired teamsters move with practiced economy, their voices sharp, their whips mostly for sound. It is not all hardship. There are evenings when the sky opens like a theater curtain and unrolls a performance of stars no city has the honesty to show. Coffee boils, bacon hisses, a fiddle appears, and a circle forms. Names are learned. Babies are passed from one set of arms to another. The Donners are noted for their even manners. Tamsin Donner, a schoolteacher before the trail, is quick to share books with children who will not see a classroom for months. The Reeds are admired and resented in equal measure, admired for generosity with tools and provisions, resented for that same high-walled wagon and the air of authority James carries like a badge. The trail itself offers a framework for order. In the early weeks, the families tuck into the slipstream of larger trains on the established road toward independence and beyond. Veteran emigrants and traders have habits that become rules: break camp by dawn, water the stock whenever you can, keep wagons in double file where the grass is high and in single file where the land narrows, and never, if you can help it, lose sight of the dust of the party ahead. Scouts ride out and back with news of the next creek or the next stand of cottonwoods. And with each day, As prairie replaces prairie and the horizon refuses to move, the rhythm of the road works on the travelers. Stomachs shrink to trail rations. Feet toughen. The idea of home loosens its nails and begins to mean, simply, the circle of wagons at night. But the West is not merely distance, it is decision. And decision breeds hierarchy. In camp councils, personalities show their edges. Reed, decisive, impatient with dithering, advocates for making time, for keeping the wagons moving even when prudence argues for rest. George Donner, older, cautious, becomes a balancing force. He is not a showman, he is a consensus builder. Men listen to him because he listens first. Women notice that when a quarrel flares over grazing rights or the order of departure, Donner's voice lowers the heat. If there is to be a recognized captain of this smaller outfit when it peels from the larger train, as eventually it will, many assume it will be George. The title is less about power than about blame. Leadership on the trail is a ledger of decisions paid for with sweat and sometimes blood. The animals set the true pace. Oxen, not horses, are the engines of the overland road, their strength patient but not bottomless. Yokes rub skin raw, tongues swell with dust, hooves split on flint. A day can be measured in the small tragedies of livestock, the calf lost to a sudden wash, the cow that goes lame, the team that refuses, at last, another mile. Each loss is a subtraction that echoes forward. Each broken spoke is not just a splintered wheel, it is a delay that will compound into something larger down the line, when weather and mountains begin to cast their votes. Along the road, the families attach new faces the way burrs attach to wool. A bachelor with a quick hand at repairs. A widower with two small children and eyes that do not quite focus on the present. A cousin of a cousin who fell in with the train near St. Joseph and intends to keep pace until the forks where Oregon-bound and California-bound finally part. With every addition, the party becomes both stronger and more cumbersome, more human and more fragile. Stories breed around the fires, of green valleys and quick harvests, of a letter read at a fort that speaks glowingly of a new and shorter road across the Great Basin, of a guidebook that promises weeks saved and suffering spared. The words land like coins dropped into a purse, you feel the weight and begin to spend it in your head. Children register the journey in a different currency. They count rivers and thunderstorms, new words and new fears. The older ones begin to understand that the men's meetings at dusk are not idle talk, decisions that move the ground under their sleeping quilts. The younger ones draw with sticks in the dust, horses and houses and a sun that seems always to be either too high or too far away. For them, California is a story told at bedtime, blue water, orange groves, no snow, no end to summer. For their parents, California is a ledger of risks measured against a future they can almost touch. The spring weeks pass. The party learns to read the sky, the grass, the behavior of the herds. They learn where to collect buffalo chips for the cook fires and how to ferry a wagon without drowning it. They learn who can be trusted with a steer that spooks and who should never be allowed to handle a loaded rifle when angry. They learn, above all, that the trail is a teacher with two methods, demonstration and punishment. By the time the road bends toward the mountain shadows and the forts where news and rumors collect like driftwood, the Donners and Reeds have become not just neighbors by circumstance but a single organism with many hearts, families tied together by the daily mutual labor of moving a small, stubborn civilization westward. They are strong in the ways the trail makes you strong, practiced in endurance, able to make and mend, confident in the resilience of their bodies and their hope. But woven into that strength are the first, faint threads of the choices that will undo them, a belief in speed as salvation, a willingness to trust a line on a map over the testimony of the land, and a confidence, quiet in the Donners, loud in the Reeds, that leadership is a thing you can carry forward and impose upon the unknown. The road ahead will ask them to choose again and again, between safety and time, between the wisdom of the traveled road and the seduction of a promise written in a book. For now, though, the wagons move, the oxen bend their necks, the prairie opens, and the idea of California pulls like a tide. The die is not yet cast. But it has been picked up. The road splits not with a trumpet but with a pamphlet. At a fort where rumors pile up like freight, letters left for no one, advice traded for coffee, someone produces a slim book by a young promoter named Lansford W. Hastings. The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. In it, a promise, a new and shorter road to California that avoids a long northern arc, weeks saved. Mountains softened by a wiser line. In a world where winter is the enemy and days are coin, who wouldn't consider a bargain like that? Talk moves from curiosity to argument in a single evening. Some old hands shake their heads. The established California Trail is hard, they say, but it is known. Hastings Road is ink and hope. Others, including James Reed, feel the weight of a different arithmetic: children who tire, cattle that angle toward weakness, a calendar that will not pause. Save weeks now and the Sierras might be a brown wall instead of a white one. When the wagons roll on, the Donna Reed party peels off with a handful of other families, drawn by the promise of speed. They turn not into a road but into a plan. Beyond the last fort, signs are scarce. Hastings himself is said to be ahead on the route, leaving notes at forks, carving directions into a cottonwood here, a message tacked to a stake there. Even the delivery sounds uncertain. Go this way. Meet me at the canyon. If the river is high, try the ridge. The first test comes quickly. The Wasatch Mountains lift out of the basin like a trap sprung. What Hastings called a good road turns, on the ground, into a tangle of steep gullies and brush-choked draws. Reed rides ahead with a small scout to find Hastings, catches up to him long enough to hear that the intended canyon is too rough for wagons, and returns with a hand-drawn alternative that is no road at all, an instruction to carve one. So they do. Men swing axes into scrub oak and willow, hands blistering. Teams strain while wheels bite into soft earth and slide back. The palace car, wagon, so impressive on the prairie, becomes a problem you can hear in the way oxen grunt under it. Every 100 yards of progress must be cut, dragged, shored, or lowered. Every descent tests a new rig of ropes. When a wheel splinters, the woodshop comes out onto the mountain, spokes shaped with draw knives, iron rims reheated in trench fires, a frontier forge born and buried in a day. Progress is measured in hours per mile, then days per hill. The party stretches, frays. Tempers rise with the pitch of the slopes. A man's suggestion can feel like an insult when sweat blinds him and his son cries for water. Women walk the lines between wagons, coaxing children, guarding what's left of flour and patience. The Wasatch teaches a simple lesson: you cannot shortcut a mountain if you brought your whole life in a box on wheels. When they finally spill out of the broken green of the range into open basin, the relief is loud and brief. Before them lies the Great Salt Lake Desert, white, flat, horizonless. Hastings' notes describe a crossing. You must fill every barrel, every bucket. You must start when the night is young and the desert air is as cool as it will ever be. You must keep moving. They do not underestimate it, and yet it is worse. The alkali crust shatters under hooves, the powder beneath rising like smoke in caking mouths. The sun comes up and the world turns into a white anvil. There is no water. Mirages pull at the eyes, the promise of a line of cottonwoods that never arrives, the basin shimmering like a lake that does not exist. Oxen begin to loll their tongues and stagger. One kneels and does not stand again. Then another. The desert steals in two ways, by taking animals and by taking hours. A team that falters slows the whole train, a wagon that bogs must be unloaded in the heat, its contents carried forward in aching stages to where a lighter chassis, if it rolls at all, can meet them. Some things are abandoned not because they are useless but because they are heavy, a trunk of good clothes, a cast iron stove, keepsakes wrapped in linen. People stand a last moment with a thing that tells them who they were, china plates, a chair with a carved back, and then set it down on the salt and walk away. The trail behind them becomes a museum gallery of refusal. Nights are a kind of mercy. They move under stars, the oxen guided by voices and the simple rope of the tongue and yoke. By daybreak, the animal's hooves are raw. Tongues crack. A steer lies down in his yoke and turns his head as if listening to something deep in the earth. When the lash fails to wake him, a man lifts a rifle he does not want to lift. Meat can't be spared, not here, the bodies bloat and glitter with salt. Some wagons arrive at the far edge in a single ragged push. Others are days behind, scattered across a white table where no help can easily go back, because going back means going back into the fire. Mothers keep children in the shade beneath wagons, fight nosebleeds and headaches that bloom with the alkali. Men who have not prayed since boyhood find themselves bargaining, one more hour of cloud, a breath of wind. They come out of the desert thinner in goods and thicker in silence. The count is terrible in small ways, fewer oxen, less flour, wheels that will not hold true, faces drawn. And the calendar has changed. Whatever the cutoff promised, it has delivered the opposite, not weeks saved, but weeks lost, not a shorter road, but a longer one slogged at half speed. The mountain line that once seemed a distant thought is now a date written in ice. The party does not turn back, no one turns back this far in. They push on toward the Humboldt River, promised as a thread of water and grass in a land that has offered neither. The river is salvation and insult, a thin green corridor walled by desert. Camps now are not music and coffee but triage. Grazing is poor, oxen nose at brittle stems. Men watch the animals the way sailors watch a ship's timbers, whatever your plans were yesterday, they now depend on whether this frame will hold. Leadership, once a matter of politeness and vote, becomes a matter of friction. Reed, who argued for the cutoff, feels the stares when a wheel snaps or a cow folds. Donner, who agreed in the end and lent it legitimacy, carries blame he wears quietly. Camp councils sharpen decisions, when to rest a team, where to ford, how to ration, become moral choices measured against the faces of children. Then the trail takes its tithe in blood. A quarrel over a team, one man's oxen crowd another's, flares into a fight, and in the swing of a whipstock and the draw of a knife, a life ends on the baked earth. Panic in a circle of wagons is like fire in a field. Order is restored, barely, and the party must do something the law does in settled places, decide what to do with a man who has killed a man. They banish him. A single rider goes on into the emptiness, a verdict as stark as the desert they escaped yesterday. The lesson is not lost. The cutoff did not just cost them animals and days, it has started to cost them the social glue that held this moving town together. Still, there are mornings of competence. Wheels are greased. Axles are checked. A girl laughs at a joke that would not have been funny 3 weeks ago, which makes it funny now. And there are small saves, a wagon lifted from a mire by an ingenious rig of levers, a fever broken with willow bark and rest, a team traded for one that still has a winter in it. Progress resumes, a grind that feels less like travel and more like a sentence being served. By the time the Humboldt bends them west and the maps look familiar again to those who refuse the cutoff, the damage is done. Their animals are thin. Their stores are thin. Their margins, the invisible cushion between an accident and a catastrophe, are thin. The shortcut has become a story you tell in a low voice, how you meant to be clever and were humbled, how paper roads can betray you, how time lost is not something you make up on a trail that does not forgive. Ahead lie the Sierra Nevada, beautiful from a distance, indifferent up close. The party has traded certainty for hope and found the exchange expensive. They will pay the balance in the only currency that remains, time, flesh, and the will to keep moving. The mountains do not announce themselves as a barrier until they are one. From the basin, the Sierra Nevada is a ridgeline of blue distance. Up close, it is stone stacked into weather, a series of gates you pass only if the season consents. The season does not. Late October, 1846, the sky hardens and lowers. Wind combs the pines at the pass into a single anxious note. The first storm arrives like a door slamming, snow thick as feathers, then heavier, then blinding. Trails vanish under an hour's fall. Hoofprints fill as soon as they're made. Men who were a wagon length away become voices and shapes, then nothing at all. In the sudden quiet that follows a squall, the world is white, odorless, without edges. They try anyway. Teams are unyoked and led, then driven, then begged forward. Sledging loads by hand, they labor toward the notch that local guides swear is the way through. A ridge, a lake, a final push. But the drifts are waist deep, then chest deep. Snow bridges collapse under weight, swallowing a man up to the neck in cold that grips like a hand. Axes ring against ice-crusted timber. Breath smokes. Children wrapped in blankets watch from wagon beds and see adults become small in a field of white. The pass wins the first round. When the sky clears for a day, it is only to make room for the next storm marching up the range. The party falls back to the lake at the base of the pass, Truckee Lake then, Donner Lake now, its black water banded with wind, its shores crowded with fir and granite. Here, if there is to be survival, it will be by architecture and arithmetic. Cabins rise from the lakeshore as if willed up by necessity. Trees come down in green thunder, their crowns thudding into drifts. Men notch logs and lever them into place, women gather boughs for bedding, older children carry sap-laced branches until their sleeves stiffen. One cabin is thrown up against a boulder, the stone itself becoming a wall, another is squared and roofed with overlapping logs and hides, a third begins as a frame and becomes, with each storm, a burrow. Smoke holes are cut and choked and cut again. Floor is earth, then bough, then hide. Doors are blankets weighted with sticks. Not everyone reaches the lake. A broken axle, a slashed hand, a day's delay, small things that were irritants on the plains become verdicts in the mountains. The Donner families, halted miles back by injury and accident, make their camp at Alder Creek, a creek now hidden under a white lid, a grove of trees now a skeleton of poles for tents. They build as well as anyone can build with cold fingers and dwindling tools, a lean-to that becomes a hut, a canvas stretched and then crusted with ice, a wall of logs chinked with moss and hope. Between the lake and the creek, the party is split, not far on a map, impossibly far when the sky opens and empties itself. Rationing becomes a ritual and a sentence. Flour is measured by the scant handful. Coffee is a memory steeped a second time in hot water to pretend it still exists. Oxen, already worn thin by the desert's theft, are put to graze in patches of bare ground kicked open by boots. When the storms come harder and longer, the animals' backs become white humps at the edge of camp, and then stop being backs at all. Meat buys days. Hides by nights, boiled into something between fuel and food, scraped and softened into crude window coverings, sewn into slippers that keep feet from freezing to the packed snow floors. Time changes shape. Daylight is work, dark is waiting. Men take turns probing the pass when the wind lies down, cutting steps into ice, planting sticks as markers that are gone by morning under new fall. They return with eyebrows hoar-frosted, beard ice clattering when they laugh without humor. Another week, someone says. If the next storm misses us, says another, as if storms were birds that might choose a different branch. Inside the cabins, the world is measured in breaths. Pine smoke stings. Sap pops. Children invent games that do not require space, counting drips where the roof thaws and refreezes, naming each creak in the logs, tracing the frost that feathers the inside of a blanket hung as a door. Mothers become accountants of warmth, who needs to be moved closer to the fire, which blanket can be spared for a neighbor, which story buys an hour of quiet from a child whose belly has learned a new, hollow language. At Alder Creek, the wind is a more constant companion. The trees speak when gusts lean through them, long vowels, low and endless. The Donner's shelter leaks, then is patched, then leaks again in some other corner. Snow piles against the windward wall until the wall is no longer a wall but a curve. They dig tunnels to the cook fire, tunnels to the latrine, tunnels to where they hope the next cache of wood might be. On days when the sky is blue and brittle, the cold is a sharper blade than the storms. Fingers lose feeling, cheeks burn and then go numb. A kettle left too long at the edge of the coals grows a ring of ice inside its lip while water boils in its belly. They keep a ledger of choices they do not speak aloud. Who sleeps nearest the door, where drafts will find them first? Which oxhide gets boiled today and which gets saved for the day you fear more? Whether to send another small party up the pass with improvised snowshoes, slabs cut from wagon boards, rawhide thongs stiff as wire, or to keep everyone close, because to lose a body to the white silence would be to lose more than one kind of hope. The lake camp and the creek camp bridge the distance with visits when weather allows, bundled figures moving as if through a dream, faces rapt, eyes narrow to slits. A sack of flour becomes a gift of survival that will last a week if a spoon is leveled in the right way. A saw blade is traded for a half sack of beans. News travels with the same halting cadence as the footsteps. A child's fever has broken, a man's cough has deepened, someone thinks the snow is settling, someone else swears it is still rising. In truth, the snow both settles and rises, compressing into dense layers that make the woods creak and the roof beams groan, while each new storm lays another white page on the book. There are attempts to leave that almost become departures. A band of the strongest and most desperate strap crude snowshoes to their feet and rise before dawn, faces greased to keep the wind from splitting skin. They climb into a world of bright cruelty, sun on snow so fierce it blinds through eyelids, air so dry it steals the water out of your breath. Their tracks go up in a clean line, then wander, then stop. By afternoon they are back, lips split, eyes red-rimmed, speaking the same three words: it will not. The pass has turned from a place into a season. What bars them is not distance but time itself. The animals thin and go. Bones appear under hides like a bad map. When a steer finally drops, what's left of the men do the necessary work without ceremony. Nothing is wasted that can be used, everything that cannot be eaten now is promised to the pot tomorrow. Children learn to be elsewhere in their minds when knives come out. Dogs, once alarms and companions, become silhouettes in the corners and then become stories. Leadership remains, but it changes flavor. Orders become requests, and requests become prayers. No one has authority over weather. The calendar that was once kept with confidence, if we make the pass by this date, is now a string of notches on a beam inside a cabin, a count of mornings woken and fires relit. The arithmetic narrows: how many mouths, how much fuel, how long. If someone coughs all night, that is a subtraction in more than one column. On a rare clear evening, the stars return as if nothing had happened. The lake goes black and polished, the snow glows with its own milk-white light, the cabins sit half-buried like hibernating animals. Around a small fire, voices lower to that intimate register people use when telling truth to themselves: this is not a bad stretch of weather, this is winter, and we are inside it. To imagine the trail beyond the pass now feels like remembering a dream: mud and sage and the Humboldt's green ribbon, events from a former life. The range has made the party into two towns connected by a path that sometimes exists. Between them flow goods, news, and a careful ration of comfort. A hymn hummed low. A page read from a book only when the littlest ones are awake to hear it. A hand laid on a shoulder and left there a second longer than politeness requires. The daily heroics are small and repetitive: another armload of wood dug from under a drift, another pot coaxed to boil, another boot thawed and refrozen and thawed again. And always, from the west, a blue hint of something beyond the ridges. California is out there, not farther than a day's fair march in summer. The party can feel it like a heartbeat through a wall. But seasons are walls. The pass has shut. The snow, which began as an inconvenience, has become a geography with its own laws. They will live inside it now, for as long as the mountains decide. Hunger arrives first as a complaint, then as a system. At Truckee Lake and at Alder Creek, each morning begins with arithmetic: how much flour remains when you sweep the bottom of the sack with a cupped hand, how many hours of heat a split log will buy, how many mouths can be fooled by a pot that smells like meat but isn't. The party learns the grammar of scarcity: small verbs, shorter sentences. The last oxen go one by one. Not in feasts but in portions measured by the depth of a spoon. Meat is dried when possible, smoked when the weather allows, and shared along lines that grew firm when the snow did. Bones crack under a hammer and give up marrow. Later, the same bones are boiled into a pale broth and, later still, burned to ash and stirred through water to pretend at nourishment. Rawhide, yokes, straps, the greened edges of old harness, is scraped, singed to drive off hair, boiled into a glue that cools in a wobble and tastes like nothing. Children chew candles. Someone finds a mouse in a trap and the cabin is suddenly, briefly, grateful. Cold makes small tasks large. A walk for wood is half a day. The trip between camps, when weather opens a corridor through the drifts, is an expedition with rules. Never go alone, mark your path with boughs, turn back at the first white hiss of new snow. Along that line of packed footprints move the currencies that keep people alive: fuel, a cup of flour, a tin of tea, a saw blade. The distance is measured less in yards than in promises kept. Illness is another slow subtraction. Coughs deepen. Cuts do not heal. Sleep feels shorter. Faces thin and sharpen, eyes seem larger in the half-light of the cabins. No one calls it by a name bigger than they can manage. They say, weakness, fever, bad turn, because to speak the whole truth would be to say what everyone knows: the body starts to eat its own stores when the pantry is bare. The cabins answer with order. Rations are weighed not with scales but with fairness. A spoon is leveled, then leveled again. Those who can still work, fell a tree, haul a log, mend a sled runner, work. Those who cannot are given work anyway to keep the mind upright, picking chips from kindling, telling stories to children who wake hungry and go to sleep hungrier. The rules are simple and human: share fire, share time, share what can be spared. When someone fails the rules, the camp notices, and the notice is its own quiet medicine. In the long winter room, thoughts row west. California grows close and unreal at the same time, like a painting on a far wall. The pass is a gate that won't lift. Each time the sky clears, talk turns to making another try. Snowshoes are planned out loud: how many boards can be sacrificed, how much rawhide left to lace them. The strongest count themselves and come up short. Still, there must be a way through. At last a small company steps forward, men and women both, picking themselves not for courage alone but for the simple fact that their bodies might still answer when asked. They bind their feet to slats cut from wagon boards, tie them with rawhide that will stiffen to wire in the cold, and grease their faces to keep the wind from cracking them open. They pack what remains of travel food: shreds of dried meat, a pinch of flour, a faithless hope in what the mountains might allow. Around the fire that last night, no speech is made. The next morning, before the cabins are fully light, they rise, hug those nearest, and go. They will be called the forlorn hope, though no one says it to their faces when they leave. Their first hours are almost buoyant, tracks hold, the ridge seems nearer than it did from below, the air is so clean it hurts. Then the climb begins in earnest. The snowshoe bite is shallow, the crust breaks, each step is a decision. They learn to fall and rise without losing the count of their breath. Sun on snow turns the whole world into a thrown fire. They wrap their eyes and keep moving. Back at the lake and the creek, the day narrows to listening. Someone swears he heard a shout high up the slope, someone else says it was wind. The trail up the pass glows blue in the late light where their tracks fell. At dusk, a child asks where the walkers are now, and an adult answers with a place the child can hold, past the big rock, near the trees that look like teeth, almost to the sky. At night, people wake from thin sleep and count in their heads: how many hours since the leaving, how many since the last storm, how many until the moon is gone and even the snow loses its light. Work does not stop for watching. Wood must be found, which means digging into drifts with a shovel until the metal rings on buried branches. Roofs must be knocked free before their own weight collapses them. Hide must be scraped and boiled again. A pot must be tended even when what's in it is more a hope than a meal. The days become a braid of these tasks, repeated until repetition is a comfort. Alder Creek is harder in every register: colder wind, fewer walls, less wood. The Donners build down as much as up, tunneling into the snowpack to make space they can warm with breath. They pack the seams of their log walls with moss and ice that freezes solid, a paradox they accept because it stops the draft. They trade when they can, plead when they must, and, like their neighbors at the lake, keep a ledger of small victories, a spark caught on damp bark, a boot thawed without cracking, a child who smiled at the sight of a bird startled from a branch by the weight of a new fall. Death comes, first separately and then closer. Someone does not wake. Someone fades over days until the line between sleep and leaving is too thin to see. Burial is not possible in a land where the ground is a stone under 10 feet of white. Bodies are wrapped, placed out in the cold because the cold is the only protection the living can spare. Words are said in voices that have practiced silence. The names keep the dead from becoming part of the scenery. On a rare clear noon, a thin column of figures appears on the far side of the lake, travelers not from the pass but along the lower trail. They have news from beyond the range, whether down country, rumor of men obtaining provisions at the settlements, the names of forts like Charms, Sutters, Johnsons, where help might be gathered. The visitors stay an hour, perhaps two, and then move on. Hope surges, collapses, reorganizes itself into something useful. If we live another week, another, then perhaps. Inside the cabins, the language of food changes from meals to sips, from hunger to maintenance. A mother invents a ritual to make less feel like enough, a story told while a spoon cools, a joke that always lands even when everyone has heard it 3 times a day for 3 weeks. A father teaches a child how to tie a knot in heavy mittens so that, if the father cannot tie it tomorrow, the child can. People who rarely touched before now anchor one another by a hand on a wrist when a wave of dizziness hits. On the ridge, the forlorn hope moves in a line that bends and straightens, bends and straightens. They measure their progress by landmarks that are too white to be landmarks and by the discipline of not looking back. They reach the crest and find what all mountain travelers find, another ridge, another decision. Nights are pits cut into the lee of drifts, days are a contract renewed with each step. Their food runs out, their judgment edges toward the place where all choices look the same. What happens next belongs to a darker chapter. Back at the lake and the creek, the party settles for the long middle of winter, where beginnings and ends are hard to tell apart. The cabins shrink around the fires. The ledger of days grows. The talk, when it turns to rescue, is quieter now, less a shout to the world than a promise said into someone's shoulder. The pass has taken the measure of these families and found in them a stubbornness that is not quite defiance. They will not make the mountains move. But they will not stop adding small yes to a page that has filled with no. Outside, snow keeps its counsel. Pines hold their breath. The lake blackens under a skin of ice and then whitens again with spindrift. If there is salvation, it will come from beyond the circle of wagons, from strangers, or from those few who went up into the white with boards on their feet and a little food in their packs, and did not come back before dark. The party waits, works, counts, and waits. Hunger is a clock that never stops, and somewhere high above, time is making up its mind. Hunger does not break a taboo in one motion, it sands it down. Long before anyone dares the final step, the mind rehearses smaller surrenders, less flour, thinner broth, a scrape of hide boiled to jelly and called supper. The body becomes a metronome of need. Thoughts narrow to the arithmetic of staying warm, of making it to morning. Somewhere inside that narrowing, a line that once seemed absolute begins to blur. It happens first with the snowshoe party, the forlorn hope, high on the white spine of the Sierra. Food dwindles to memory, faces sink, the cold drills straight through bone. When the first of their number dies, there is no speech about what must follow because there is nothing left to say. They had already promised one another, in fragments, that no one would be harmed for food, that only the dead would be considered. Even so, when the moment arrives, the air itself seems to object. Hands hover. Eyes avert. Someone stares at the sky as if to find a different answer written there. They do what people do when forced to become the kind of people they never imagined, they create rules. The dead will be named and thanked. No one will eat from a body of their own kin. Portions will be shared in a way that keeps the weakest from slipping away. A few refuse as long as they can, passing their share to children, to a companion whose hands have begun to shake, to the one who still sings quietly into his scarf to keep breath steady. But the mountain has its own logic. Refusal becomes faintness, faintness becomes collapse, collapse becomes a new grief and, with it, the same terrible mercy. For days that feel like years, the party moves and stops, measuring progress not by miles but by whether a voice can still answer when called. The sun on the snow is a kind of cruelty, too bright, too honest. They pad their eyes with cloth, they whisper the names of those who have fallen so that the names do not evaporate into white. No one is a villain here. There is only the slow grinding mill of winter and the decisions it forces. Then the story darkens. Two native men, guides from the California side who had come east with rescuers and stayed with the forlorn hope as long as they could, sense a turn in the party's thoughts and slip away into the timber rather than be caught inside the circle of that final calculus. Days later, weak and starving, the snowshoe party comes upon them huddled near a faint fire. The choice that follows is not a choice in any civilized sense, it is a collision between two mortal desperations. A gun is raised. Shots break the silence. The men are killed, and the party lives on their bodies. No one tells this part as triumph. Even in later years, when the survivors speak of it at all, the words fall short and then fall silent. It is the scene that will not fit any of the rules they made to keep a shred of order in their hunger. It sits like a stone in the belly of the narrative, a weight that cannot be lightened by context or apology. The mountains took a season from these travelers, this moment took something else that has no season. Back at Truckee Lake and at Alder Creek, the same erosion of boundaries arrives by a different road. Death comes in sleep, or in the long exhalation after a coughing fit, or in the simple failure of a body that has been asked for more than it can give. Burial is impossible. The ground is a locked door. Families who would have knelt over graves in any other season now hold council around wrapped forms laid beyond the cabin, in the snows in different keeping. Here, too, rules appear, harder to keep some days than others, but rules all the same. No one is to be harmed. Only the dead. Food is cut and cooked out of sight of children when possible, when not possible, the pot is shielded by a body, a blanket, a gentler lie. There are those who refuse entirely, Tamsin Donner among them, by some accounts, choosing to wait out the hunger with tea of pine needles and the thin comfort of principle. Others accept small portions with eyes closed. A few take only enough to keep a pulse regular so they can keep splitting wood, hauling snow, tying knots that must hold. If there is sin here, it is spread so thin by necessity that it clings to everyone and no one at once. Names are said like prayers before the pot is uncovered. Bits of clothing are set aside, a lock of hair, a small thing that can stand for a person when the person cannot. Children are told stories while they eat so that the shape of the story can sit between them and the truth, a shield made of words. The older ones know anyway. They know from the way adults avoid certain pronouns. They know from the way a ladle pauses over a bowl as if listening. These are not feasts. They are calculations. Each small, careful meal buys a day for someone, an infant, a mother just strong enough to nurse, a man whose shoulders can still lift a log onto a sled. Guilt becomes part of the work, carried like any other weight. In the low light of the cabins, faces hollow into the fine lines of portraits. If anyone sings, it is almost always to children, almost always the same tune, a thin bridge over a wide dark. From time to time, the weather opens, and with the light comes a change in the room, voices a notch louder, jokes that land. Someone has a dream in which the pass is bare and the wagons roll. Someone else dreams of oranges so vivid their smell wakes her. The dreams make people both glad and sad. They are reminders that there is a world outside this white one. The ledger of who is left is updated in heads, not on paper. Alder Creek counts its illnesses, the lake camp counts its fires. Sometimes a figure appears between the two, a neighbor blurred by snow, bringing a saw blade, a pouch of flour so light it feels like hope itself, news of a child's fever broken or a man's breathing eased. The camps hold each other up across that distance, trading not just goods but proof that the human voice still travels. No one pretends that what they have done is anything but what it is. When the talk turns to God, it does so softly. When the talk turns to the spring, it does so in fragments, if we see it, if the snow settles, if the next storm spares us. They do not forgive themselves, they do not condemn themselves, they simply continue, which is its own hard morality. High above, the forlorn hope limps on, a few souls pulled west by a thread made of promises given in those dark cabins. We will send help, hold fast, keep the fires. They carry the names of the lost the way a priest carries the names of the baptized, carefully, aloud, so that absence does not become anonymity. When at last they stagger into the lower country and into the orbit of settlements, they are at once saved and branded by what saved them. Their first ask is not for food but for a party to go back. In the lake camp and at Alder Creek, the snow continues to rule. The taboo, once broken, does not become habit, it remains a wound. But wounds can be survived. People get up, tend the fire, dig the tunnel, share the last spoon. In this, the party discovers a ferocious, unornamented version of itself. No speeches, no banners, only a refusal to stop tending to one another even when the tending is a misery. If there is a word for it, it is not heroic. It is simply endurance. What comes next? Voices calling from the trees, shapes moving out of the blue distance, the first rescuers with their own hard stories, is already on the way, set in motion by those who walked into the white and did not die there. But the price of that motion will travel with the survivors wherever they go. Some debts are settled by spring. Some are carried for a lifetime. February, 1847. Voices in the trees, shapes moving out of the blue-white glare. The first relief party stumbles into Truckee Lake and Alder Creek, called there by those who had walked out over the pass and turned survival into a summons. What they find are rooms of thin smoke, cabins buried to the eaves, faces home to points. The living blink in the light, protective of the small heat they have kept against the cold. Rescue arrives in relays, not miracles. The first group wraps children in blankets and leads them down. Some adults refuse to leave a spouse, a parent, a promise. A second party follows, then a third and a fourth. Between visits, storms erase tracks. Those who stayed to help become those who must be helped. At Alder Creek, Tamsin Donner, by some accounts, will not abandon her husband. Her choice becomes part of the story's permanent ache. The descent is its own ordeal, starved bodies asked to become travelers again, children drifting in and out of dream, rescuers measuring how far a spoonful of something real can carry a life. Along the way a few simply stop, lungs too tired, hearts too empty, and the arithmetic of mercy must be done, who can be carried, who must be promised that another party is coming. By spring, 48 of 87 are alive. The fraction will never reduce. Beyond the mountains, the tale outruns the wagons. Newspapers trade rumor for headlines, flattening winter into a single word that sticks to names like pitch. Lecturers make theater of it, printers make dime novels. The survivors have no such simplification. They carry contradictions that do not print cleanly, gratitude tangled with shame, endurance with loss, ordinary love fused to choices no one should ever face. What did this winter decide? That paper shortcuts can cost a season, that leadership without luck is only a posture, that mountains are not obstacles to conquer but conditions to endure, if they allow it. The Donner Party becomes a warning written across maps and calendars: leave early, distrust easy advantages, respect the mountain's clock. Yet inside the caution is something quieter and harder to headline, the unhandsome bravery of tending one another when tending is all that remains. Our telling ends where theirs does not, with the long work of living afterward. The survivors bury what cannot be carried, remember what should not be forgotten, and step forward anyway. If this story moved you, support the work, like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so these difficult histories, and the lessons they still press upon us, do not disappear into the snow.